Hello viewers, welcome to the channel. My name is Antika. I hope all of you have been keeping well during the festivities. Now let's get back to studies. Today I am going to discuss a poem from the book Treasure Chest for my ICSE students of class 9. Let's get started. In this video, we'll get to know about the poet, why Thomas Hood likely wrote the poem, and then I'm going to read the poem and explain it line by line. After that, we'll also get to know about the summary, themes, rhyme scheme, and meter of the poem. Now, Thomas Hood. Who was Thomas Hood? Thomas Hood was a 19th century English poet as well as a humorist and social commentator known for his wit and deep empathy. Now, a humorist, it means a person who regularly writes or tells amusing stories, while social commentator refers to a person who expresses their opinions on social issues and on current events. Here, wit refers to the ability to use words in charming or amusing way, and deep empathy refers to someone's ability to understand a person's feeling or mood. So, we get to know that despite struggling with chronic illness, as in a long-term health condition that required regular medical care and the resulting financial difficulties, Thomas Hood had produced a wide range of humorous satire. Humorous satire means parody, to poignant reflections, which means reminiscence on social issues and personal hardships. His most famous poems, such as The Song of the Skirt and I Remember, highlight both his keen sense of humor and his sensitivity to human suffering. The poet Thomas Hood likely wrote the poem I Remember, as a nostalgic reflection on his childhood, therefore contrasting the simplicity and innocence of youth with the hardships of adulthood. This poem expresses the poet's longing for the carefree days of childhood and an awareness that he can never return to that time. The tone of the poem is bittersweet, as in the poem has some happy aspects and some sad aspects. Here, Thomas Hood recalls the joy and wonder of youth, but he also acknowledges the pain as well as the burdens he now feels. Reading the poem I Remember, by Thomas Hood. I remember the house where I was born, the little window where the sun came peeping in at morn. He never came a wing too soon, nor brought too long a day. But now I often wish the night had borne my breath away. I remember the roses red and white, the violets and the lily cups, those flowers made of light, the lilacs where the robin built and where my brother set the laburnum on his birthday, the trees living yet. I remember where I used to swing and thought the air must rush as fresh to swallows on the wing. My spirit flew in feathers then, that is so heavy now, and summer pools could hardly cool the fever on my brow. I remember the fir trees dark and high. I used to think their slender tops were close against the sky. It was a childish ignorance, but now it's little joy to know I'm further off from heaven than when I was a boy. I remember the house where I was born. In these lines, the speaker is recalling, as in remembering memories from his childhood, specifically of the house where he was born. He is starting to think back to his early life, full of personal and precious memories. The little window where the sun came peeping in at morn. Here, the speaker remembers a small window in his childhood home where the morning sun would shine through. It felt as if the sun was gently peeping in, almost like a friendly presence waking him up each day. He never came a wink too soon, nor brought too long a day. In these lines, the speaker remembers how the sun always rose just at the right time, never too early and never making the day feel too long. But now I often wish the night had borne my breath away. Here, the speaker reveals that as an adult, he sometimes feels so weighed down by life that he wishes he could simply sleep through the night and perhaps not wake up. This line reflects his current struggles and hints at a feeling of despair as an immense sadness, contrasting sharply with the peace and simplicity he felt as a child. I remember, the roses red and white. In these lines, the speaker fondly remembers the beautiful red and white roses from his childhood garden. These flowers symbolize the simple, joyful moments of his youth that stand out vividly in his memory. The violets and the lily cups, those flowers made of light. Now, the speaker recalls other flowers like the violets and lily cups, describing them as made of light. This phrase suggests that these flowers seemed magical and vibrant in his childhood eyes, as if almost glowing with life and beauty. The lilacs were the robin built. In these lines, the speaker remembers the lilac bushes in his childhood garden, where a robin once built its nest, and where my brother sat the laburnum on his birthday. Now the speaker remembers that once his brother planted a laburnum tree on his birthday. The tree is living yet. The speaker notes that the tree is still alive. This small detail highlights how some parts of the speaker's childhood, like the tree, have lasted over time. However, other things have changed. I remember, where I was used to swing. In these lines, the speaker now fondly remembers the place where he used to swing as a child. This memory brings back feelings of joy and freedom, therefore capturing a time when life was simple and carefree. And thought the air must rush as fresh to swallows on the ring. Here, the speaker reflects on how while swinging, he imagined that the air felt as fresh and exciting as it did for swallows, as in the swallow birds flying in the sky. This memory evokes a sense of joy and feeling of freedom that he experienced during his childhood. My spirit flew in feathers then. In this line, the speaker expresses that he felt light and free during his childhood, as if his spirit could soar like a bird with feathers. This imagery as in poetic description that we can visualize. So, this imagery conveys a sense of joy and freedom, highlighting on how carefree the poet was at that time. That is so heavy now. In this line, the speaker contrasts his childhood feelings of happiness and joy with his current state, stating that now he feels weighed down or immensely burdened with his responsibilities. This also reflects the challenges and worries of adulthood that have now replaced the carefree spirit he once had as a child. And summer pools could hardly cool the fever on my brow. In these lines, the speaker notes that even though the refreshing summer pools, which should provide relief and comfort, can barely ease the worries and stress that the poet feels now, described as the fever on my brow. This suggests that despite trying to find relaxation or escape, his adult burdens and anxieties are still overwhelming. I remember, the fir trees dark and high. In these lines, the speaker gets reminded of the tall, dark fir trees from his childhood. These trees stand out in his memory, evoking as in generating feelings of wonder and perhaps also a sense of mystery, because when he was young, those trees seemed large and imposing due to his youth. I used to think their slender tops were close against the sky. Here, the speaker remembers believing that the tall, thin tops of the fir trees almost touch the sky. This reflects the perspective of a child who often sees the world as grand and limitless, therefore highlighting his sense of wonder and imagination during his youth. It was a childish ignorance. In the above mentioned line, the speaker acknowledges that his childhood belief about the trees touching the sky was a childish ignorance. He realizes now that this perspective was naive, indicating that as he grew up, he gained a more realistic understanding of the world, contrasting the innocence of his young age with the awareness that comes with maturity. But now it's little joy to know I am further off from him than when I was a boy. In the last few lines, the poet concludes the poem by saying that it brings him little happiness to realize he feels more distant from the idea of heaven or happiness now than he did as a child. This thought reflects a sense of sorrow and loss as he acknowledges that adulthood has brought him challenges and burdens that have taken away the joy and innocence that he once felt. The summary of the poem. Thomas Hood's poem I Remember reflects on the poet's memories of childhood and how they differ from his adult life. He recalls as in remembers the simple joys like the house where he grew up, sunlight streaming from his window, and a garden full of flowers and trees. He remembers swinging freely, feeling as light as the birds, and once thinking that the trees almost touch the sky. Yet these happy memories are mixed with sadness as he realizes how much has changed. In this poem, there are four main important themes: nostalgia for childhood, loss of innocence, reality versus idealism, and the passage of time. In Nostalgia for Childhood, the poem reflects a deep longing for the innocence, freedom, and the joys of childhood. Here, the poet fondly remembers the simple yet happy moments from his youth, which now feel precious and distant. In Loss of Innocence, as the speaker reflects on his memories, he becomes aware of how much his perspective has changed with age. The carefree view of the world he once had is now replaced by a more realistic, burdened outlook. The next important themes are reality versus idealism and the passage of time. In reality versus idealism, we can see that our childhood memories are idealized, therefore portraying life as simple yet joyful. However, our adulthood brings harsher realities, and the speaker finds himself feeling farther off from heaven as he faces life's complexities and burdens. In the next theme, the passage of time, Thomas Hood contrasts the lightness of his childhood with the heaviness he feels in his adulthood. This highlights how time affects our experiences and perceptions as youthful wonder fades into adult responsibilities and challenges. So, we can say that the poem I Remember captures a universal theme. How many people look back on their childhood with fondness, especially when facing the difficulties of adult life. Here, Thomas Hood's reflections on his past serve as a way to cope with his present struggles, therefore giving readers insight into the contrast between childhood innocence and adult reality. Now, let us all take a look at the structure of the poem. As I have already mentioned many times that Thomas Hood's poem I Remember is a reflective poem that fondly recalls childhood memories. Right? Now, this poem has 32 lines divided into 4 stanzas, with each stanza containing 8 lines, therefore creating a steady rhythm. Now, the poem is written in the first person. Therefore, here the poem shares the poet's personal feelings about his youth. Students, you must have noticed that the line I remember has been repeated throughout the poem. Okay, so this repetition of I remember ties the stanzas together and reinforces the poet's longing for the innocence and joy of his younger years. Now, Let us take a look at the rhyme scheme of the poem. Here, Thomas Hood uses a steady rhyme scheme to give the poem a unique flow, with each stanza starting in the same way. I remember, I remember. Okay. As we read the poem, we can notice that in each stanza, lines 2 and 4 and lines 6 and 8 rhyme. This creates a consistent rhythm following the ABCB pattern in each 4-line stanza. Okay. For example, in the first stanza, the word born in line 2 rhymes with morn in line 4, and day in line 6 rhymes with away in line 8. Alright, this rhyming keeps the tone cheerful and engaging while allowing the readers to enjoy the nostalgic memories that Thomas Hood shares about his childhood. Let us take a look at the meter of the poem. Meter of the poem means the rhythm of the poem. Okay. In I remember, the poet uses a regular ballad meter. Ballad meter means a rhythmic pattern that is often used in poetry and songs. Now, students, without making it much more difficult, just remember that in this poem, iambic tetrameter and iambic trimeter have been used. Okay.